Good afternoon and welcome to the next in our series of Leadership Lunch and Learn forums. Today we're going to be looking at one of the biggest challenges that I'm seeing when I'm speaking to employers of accountants, and that is a thing to do with retention. So we're seeing employers having issues with people leaving employment, particularly I'm seeing in the middle of their study. So where usually we would see people joining firms, training for sometimes 3, sometimes 5, sometimes even 7 years from starting right the way through to completion, we're actually seeing people leaving midway through that journey and moving to other firms, other businesses. I've heard of people that have been leaving within the first 6 months of joining, and not because they don't like the industry, but because they're being offered alternative roles elsewhere. I had a roundtable discussion with a number of apprenticeship employers, and this was across many different industries, and it's not something that's just confined to the accountancy industry. So it's something that I was in one way comforted, because I think every industry seems to be facing a similar issue with holding on to talent. There seems to be talent's very fluid at the moment, but also, a little bit kind of like concerned, but there is so much movement in so many industries, and I know it's something a lot of the employers that I work with are feeling at the moment. So that was the reason that led us to have this discussion. Now we put together a panel of experts that I'm going to be kind of introducing you to in a minute. We have got a short presentation that we're going to be going through, or that Kay, one of our panel members, is going to be going through, and then I'm going to be opening up the floor to questions. So if anyone has got questions that they want to raise, please can you put them in the chat box. We'll get through as many questions as we possibly can. So any questions. Also, if you've had anything that you found that's particularly worked for you, or anything that you're proud of, or any victories that you feel that you've had, then again, I'd be really happy to hear you in the chat box kind of talk about those things that have worked for you. I know not every business has had issues with retention. So there are businesses that I work with that have had no retention issues. So if that's you and you're thinking, well, what's all this retention stuff? We've got the same staff that have been working with us for the last 10 years and no one's ever left. I'd love to find out what you're doing that's so successful, that means that you're not having issues with talent and talent kind of moving on to kind of new pastures. So what I'm going to do to start with, I'm going to introduce our talents. They are our talented panel. So I'm going to introduce our panel. So I'm going to get them all to say a few brief words about who they are and where they're from. And then Kay, as I say, has got a lovely presentation to run through, and then we'll take some questions. So I'm going to start with David. So David Cully. So good afternoon, David.
Good afternoon. Hello. Yeah, my name's David Cully. My main interest in all of this is from the accountancy and finance perspective. So I do a lot of work through future finance training in terms of training and development. And I'm particularly interested in how the role of the accountant is changing. So what impact digital technology is having, what impact changes in the workplace are having. So I'm seeing that sort of recruitment and retention issue very much within this, what's being demanded from people within our profession. I will stop there, otherwise you'll end up with 90 minutes on data analytics or something like that. So I'll resist the temptation to go any further.
And is that change in the industry, do you see that as being partly responsible for that movement of talent, i.e. people moving because they want to engage with a new way of working, or people leaving because they're scared of a new way of working?
I think it's a combination of the two. I think there's certainly a bit of a shock to the system, and I prepare students for their professional qualifications. So I see, for example, some students who are brilliant at the early stages and they're really good technically, and then they get to a later stage and suddenly they're being asked to demonstrate skills that they just weren't expecting. They're being asked to demonstrate leadership or communication. And that can be quite a shock to the system. And then I think we also have sometimes students who are trying to reconcile what they're being taught for their qualification with what's going on in the workplace. And I often hear, when I'm doing workshops with clients, we do all sorts of exciting things with case studies and skills. And then I say to them, so, how does this change the way that you're working? And they say, well, it's not, because I don't get the opportunity to demonstrate those skills in my day-to-day role. So I think there's a balance across the two there.
Okay, thanks for that, David. Now, I'm sure we'll come back to you with loads more on that later on. Next on our panel is Carolyn. So good afternoon, Carolyn.
Good afternoon. Nice to be here. Thank you. Yeah, my name's Carolyn Connery. I work for the Chartered Management Institute as a relationship manager. And it's actually very interesting what David have just said. So it's not just across accountancy, it's across every sector that we see. So everything that we deal with is all about leadership management. And again, going back to what David just said, is that people are perhaps taking a professional qualification, then suddenly realizing that actually they're supposed to be able to lead and manage in a completely different world to the world they used to lead in, perhaps without the skills or the knowledge, or as David also said, being given the opportunity to demonstrate that day to day. So a little bit like him, I could go on forever and ever, but I won't. But hopefully that will bring up some questions for me in terms of what that looks like moving forward from our perspective.
Okay, thanks, Carolyn. And I think I could probably ask exactly the same question about that requirement for management that maybe we're not prepared for. Is that something people are running to or running from? And I guess it very much depends on the person. I think, as David said, is are people running because they want to take on those extra responsibilities, or running away from them because it's something that's been put upon them that they don't feel prepared for?
I think it's both. I think probably the majority is actually people running away from it because they're not prepared. Mm-hmm. And I think that what happens often, and it's something that we as an organisation refer to, perhaps not greatly, as an accidental manager. So someone becomes very, very good at their job, and particularly in the world we live in now, we've got hybrid working and looking after people's mental health and all the things that goes into that. So they're very good at their job and they become a manager, but no one actually shows them how to lead or manage. So we have a lot of people who have been given that opportunity to step up, and maybe 5 or 6 months in, they haven't had the support to do it, and they move on somewhere else and don't manage anybody. So it's been able to combine those skills with the technical skills, but actually been able to be a good leader.
Excellent. And finally on our panel we have Kay. So good afternoon, Kay.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to be here today. I'm a people and organisation development consultant, so I specialise in management, leadership and team development, with a particular angle on creating inclusive working environments for people. My expertise is in people development. I'm absolutely passionate about helping people to fulfil their potential. My background is working in HR, across the breadth of HR, across sectors, public and private sector. So what I'm hoping to do today is to bring some of that kind of best practice alongside my real life experience and share some of that insight with you today.
Excellent, thanks, Kay. And Kay, you have a presentation that you're going to go through first of all with us. So I'm just going to ask if you want to kind of share your screen and kind of then share your thoughts with the group.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, so we should be able to see the screen now. So thanks everyone for giving up your lunchtime today to be with us. We really appreciate it, especially since we're into midsummer now and the sun is shining. So I hope that you find this next 20 minutes or so really valuable. Take away some practical tips that can make a difference where you are. So what I want to focus on today is really getting to the root of our retention issues. And I thought a good place to start with this slide that is actually produced by Sir David MacLeod and Nita Clark, who have worked extensively over the last 15 years, initially sponsored by the Department for Business and Innovation, I think it was back then, to really research into the business case and the evidence for engagement. And over the past 10 years, they've produced and created a community of organizations who can share some really useful best practice into how to really engage people. And when we have people engaged, then we will keep hold of them. So I would really recommend their website. The first recommendation for today, have a look at engageforsuccess.org. Some really useful tools on there. But essentially, what I love about their work is that it really simplifies it. And this is common sense. You know, when we look at this, it's absolutely common sense. People simply need to know what to do and want to do it. So what I'd like to do today is really kind of zip through some key questions. How can we create those conditions that will motivate people to give their best and stay with us? I'm going to do a little bit of a refresher on extrinsic and intrinsic motivation. Some of you will have studied that in your career. Look at some of the current practice around motivation, focusing on autonomy, mastery and purpose that comes from Dan Pink's work. And then I want to take us into, how can we apply this in practice? What are the priorities for us as managers? And how can we develop our leadership skills to really make a difference? So let me start with a question for you. When you choose to get out of bed every morning, when you woke up this morning and chose to get out of bed and go to work in your organisation, in your firm, in your place of work, what is it that's taking you to your current place of work? And why do you keep doing that day in, day out? Why your current place of work? Of course, almost all of us need to earn money to live. But almost all of us also have a choice about how we earn that money. So why your place of work? Why not the next firm down the road, the organisation in the next town? And linked to that question, but perhaps a slightly different question, is why do you choose to be in your profession? Why do you choose to stay in your profession? And when we think about that in relation to retaining our people, we need to try and get into their shoes and understand their reasons for turning up to work every day in your organisation. To retain people, they have to choose, they must choose to come to your organisation and keep coming back. So we need people to want to do the work. That is totally obvious, but we also need them to want to do it with you. So we need to pay attention to creating those conditions that motivate people to give their best and to stay with us, to keep doing that. So when we think about motivation, I thought it might be useful to do a really brief refresher on these kind of two key sources of motivation, extrinsic and intrinsic. I'm sure that you'll have studied this in the past, the sort of things that David, you and I know you cover this sort of stuff in your leadership programs. But again, useful to think about what motivates you. What conditions have been in place when you've been at your best, you've given your best at work? And giving some thought to those and remembering those is really helpful in terms of raising our self-awareness of what's going on for us, but also then the importance of being able to understand what those conditions need to be for other people. Because the challenge is that those will be different for everybody. Unfortunately, if we did the same thing as what works for us, that won't work for David, it won't work for Andy. They're going to need different things. So extrinsic motivation, what we're talking about here are rewards that are external to the work itself. It might be a pay rise, it might be a bonus, it might be a day off, it might be a promotion. Different examples outside of it. Perhaps it's about studying to get a good grade or participating in a sport to win. It might be competing in a contest to win a scholarship, but it also can be about avoiding things. And we touched on this in the introduction. It might be about avoiding things that we don't want, like negative feedback, or avoiding the type of work that we don't enjoy. It might be about cleaning up simply to avoid being reprimanded by your partner. So those are all those types of extrinsic rewards. If I asked you to run up and down the road, run to the end of the road and back, and I'll give you a £5, you might do it once, you might do it twice. If you really like running, you might do it quite a few times. But do you really want to run up and down that road? You might want the fiver, but do you really want to run up and down the road for it? How long will that financial reward work in terms of getting you to run up and down the road? How many times can I get you to run up and down the road before you say, actually, not that bothered anymore? The chances are that you will reach a point where you stop making an effort or you stop altogether. Even if I upped the ante and said, okay, I'll give you a tenner, it's likely that you still, it will stop being a motivator for you. And I've seen this many times in my career where I've worked on agreeing pay awards, in negotiation with unions and different parties, especially in public sector where pay is always an issue, that however much we are able to afford to give in a pay reward is never enough. There is never sufficient funding. And even when we then start to diversify into additional benefits, and even when we're then able to tailor those so that people can choose the benefits that are most meaningful for them, there's still a point at which those motivators, those external rewards stop working. And I've seen this in my years of where we've given repeated pay awards and turnover continues to increase despite the increasing pay awards. So there's something else going on alongside, and that's where this concept of intrinsic reward comes in. Intrinsic rewards very much comes from the work itself. It's perhaps the freedom to enjoy the work that you enjoy, doing the work you enjoy, or the growth of skill and expertise, or a sense of achievement or fulfillment. Exactly, you know, it might be, if you think outside of work, participating in a sport just for the love of it rather than for the winning of it, solving puzzles, or even having children. You know, that's kind of a real good example of an intrinsic reward. But what we find, and I'm sure many of you will have experienced this, what we find across industry is that many of our organizations are dominated by this more of the extrinsic reward, the carrot and stick approach to motivation. If you do well, you'll get a reward. If you do badly, you'll have something removed or you'll be punished. And it's really deeply ingrained into organizational cultures. And we tend to put our focus there rather than onto the intrinsic reward, which the research, especially the research was reported by Dan Pink, really indicates that actually focusing on intrinsic reward is what will make the greater difference. So let's have a little look then at the work that's been reported by Dan Pink. So this book I'd recommend to you. It's quite a nice read. It's got lots of interesting stories in there. And he shares what he calls a surprising truth about what motivates us. Actually, perhaps for us, it's not that surprising. Individually, it's not surprising. Yet, we still, within our organizational cultures, focus on the opposite. So Dan really challenges whether the traditional motivational strategies like carrot and stick really work. And the research indicates that those extrinsic motivators don't work for anything other than the most routine tasks. And so he goes on to propose 3 key areas we can focus on to provide intrinsic motivation. I'm sure many of you may have come across this before. It's really nice, easy to model. Remember the AMP model: autonomy, mastery, and a purpose. So let's have a brief look at what we mean by those 3 key areas. So starting with autonomy. Autonomy is kind of a human motivation to that need to direct our own life and work. To be fully motivated, we want to be in control of what we're doing, when we do it, and who we do it with. And this is really the underpinning of inclusive leadership. So if we want to create an inclusive working environment for people, and I'd suggest that that's what we need to be doing if we want to keep hold of people, then autonomy is one of the key elements that we can really focus on trying to create, where we're able to value and use people's difference at work, enable everyone to thrive at work, that everyone feels that they belong without having to conform to a particular way of doing things, that their contribution matters and that they're able to perform to their full potential in a way that works for them. And I think this has been a particular area of challenge for all of us over the last couple of years as we shifted to hybrid working. How do we do this in this even more complicated world of people, some days in the office, some days working from home? We want to be flexible enough to provide the autonomy to work where and when and how you want, but it has practical challenges. Making it work in practice, the reality of that is not straightforward. So undoubtedly a big challenge, I think, for managers and leaders right now. The second area, mastery. The mastery is this innate desire to improve. If we're motivated by mastery, we're likely to see that our potential is unlimited and we'll be constantly seeking to improve our skills through learning and practice. And it's very much around attaining that mastery and development for its own sake, rather than for the purpose of having a specific outcome. And I put this image on the screen as an example of this, because if we think about Formula One and other racing events, you think about the racing driver and the team that supports them are constantly striving to get split-second improvements in their performance. They're continually tinkering and testing out and trying to achieve this improvement. And of course, there's big bucks involved in racing. You know, there's a huge commercial gain at stakes here. But my assessment of this is it goes beyond that. And having spoken to some people who work in these pit stop teams, I know that actually they're not there for the money. They're there and putting in the 11th hour because they want to get that little bit of improvement, because they're driven by that sense of wanting to improve, to do the very best that they can. And I haven't got the pleasure of knowing any racing drivers, but if anybody has, it would be great to hear from them, you know, what's driving them, because of course, you know, they get the big paychecks and a bottle of champagne at the end, the extrinsic rewards, but what's really driving them inside and is this concept of mastery. But in relation to us back in the world of accountancy and finance, I think personal development has never been more important to people. In the last 2 years, we've really learned the importance of being resilient in an uncertain world. And people now more than ever, I think, value the opportunity to learn new skills and to future-proof themselves. So giving your people that opportunity to prioritize their continuing professional development, going beyond those technical elements, and we touched on this at the beginning, for example, you know, to boost self-awareness, to boost resilience, to develop interpersonal skills, broader business skills. Those things not only are going to provide the opportunity for mastery for people, but they're going to boost your productivity, they're going to help with problem solving and innovation in your business. And then this third area, purpose. So purpose is about the belief that we're working towards something that's larger and more important than ourselves. We understand and invest in the bigger picture. And we can do that by connecting our personal goals to those of the organisation. And a brilliant example that comes from NASA back in the 1960s, you may have heard this, where a janitor, I think the president of the US goes to visit NASA ahead of its rocket launch, and he's introduced one of the janitors, and I won't attempt to do an American accent, but just because it doesn't sound as good as a Yorkshire accent, but he says, you know, hello, so what do you do here? What's your role? And He said, I'm here to help put a man on the moon. Rather than, you know, I'm not here to clean the toilets and sweep the floor. I'm here to help put a man on the moon. And that's a really brilliant example of having a purpose beyond our own individual roles. So helping people to understand their purpose and how that links, and perhaps exploring what the purpose of your business is beyond making a profit, can really help to build this intrinsic motivation driven by purpose, which is so fundamental to keeping hold of people. Simon Sinek has done a lot of work. Again, I would recommend having a look at his work. There's a nice TED talk that he does called Start With Why. Basically, he's proposing that everything we do, whether it's positioning our product or leading our people, should start with why. Why being the prerequisite to what we do and how we do it. And for a leader, this is very much at the heart of engaging our people. High-performing people we know will do things that they believe are important. They agree that they should be done. And so therefore they're committed to doing whatever it takes to make that happen. It's why they get out of bed in the morning and bring their best self to work. When I worked in the Science Museum group, this really came to life for me because I'd moved from the banking sector. So I won't name the bank that I worked with. It was a big, huge multinational bank. And it was pre-banking crisis. And I worked in head office in London, and the culture was pretty dire. It wasn't a great way. It was very competitive. It was very macho. People were really driven by what their bonus would be at the end of the year. I worked in the area of learning development. So I was very much driven by trying to help people development and focusing on talent. I moved to a different sector because I wasn't so motivated by the bonuses. I enjoyed having a nice holidays, but actually the behavior was just not, just wasn't enjoyable. But in a different sector and in social sector, this is easier to start to identify this purpose. Within the Science Museum group, we did a huge piece of work to reposition the purpose of the group, and that was to inspire futures. So when you go into any of the science museums across the UK, what we were trying to achieve, they still are trying to achieve when you head in those, to inspire futures, whether that's children, whether that's women, whether that's people from different background, and so on. And that was something that in a sector where people earned a huge amount less than they do in banking, they really believed in what they were there to do. And they could have gone down the road and got paid more at Tesco, but they still chose to come in and do a role that involved inspiring futures, and they could see their role in it. And that takes us on really quite nicely actually to values. And values is something that I'm really passionate about. And some of you who perhaps have been on the previous session might have heard me wax lyrical about values previously. But it's what underpins why we choose to stay somewhere, why we choose to leave somewhere. It takes us back to those questions I asked earlier. Why do you work here? Why do you work in your profession? And the pandemic led us really to a reevaluation of what's important to us, the principles and values that underpin our purpose and priorities have changed. I'll very briefly share some research with you conducted by the Institute of Leadership and Management. It looked at values and found that 70% of personal values held by employees are not those championed by their employer. And of those people researched, men had 50% of their core values in common with the top 10 organization values, whereas women had only 30% in common. And The research also found that millennials and Gen Z are generally not involved in value setting. Make a difference was one of the top values for employees. They want to make a difference. Yet it was only in the top 10 organisation values within the charitable sector. So a really big disconnect. So our employees are placing much more value on the human aspect of work, things like honesty, doing the right thing, making a difference, than we are as organisations. And so for those of us who are able to influence and even set values and role model values for our organisations, I think there's some scope there for us to really review our values, because people will choose where to work based on what's important to them and how that matches to what's important for those organisations. Glassdoor did some research that supports exactly the same points. They found that 69% of their people they surveyed would not apply to a company unless its values aligned with their personal values. And the same will therefore apply to retention. So very much a case here to do some work humanising our values. So moving on then to what we can do, some practical tips then here on what we can do to help retain people. And what all of this means, of course, when we think about ourselves, is people choose their boss. They will choose whether they want to work with you or not. And so our priorities as leaders, based on all we've said and based on all we've gone through in the last couple of years, are very likely to be focusing on well-being and resilience for people. And that requires supportive, positive management approaches that help people deal with the challenges and opportunities of the current context. We've pretty much got through the pandemic, but yet the cost of living is spiraling. There's still such significant factors driving people's change in values and what's important. And people are looking for more compassionate leadership. Inclusion and flexibility are really important. We know from research reported by the Office for National Statistics that mental health continues to be a really big issue. The pandemic exacerbated those issues. So we know that we really need to take some effort to care for people's well-being, and that will aid retention. And we know that when we looked at what happened during the pandemic, that the role of line managers really did make a difference. Research showed that people who had less contact with their manager in the early days of the pandemic had poorer mental health. Also, looking across organisations that do regular employee opinion surveys, in many cases, and certainly with clients I work with, their results went up during the pandemic because people were getting more contact with their line manager early on. Then as things started to taper off, the results started to come back down again. So it's really helpful for us to reflect on our managerial and leadership style, tailoring it to every individual based on what their need is. And often when I talk about compassionate leadership, people kind of glaze over and think, oh, that sounds really wishy-washy and soft. So I find that this kind of concept of considering how we combine our wisdom along with compassion can really help. It's not about being soft. It's not about giving in to people and meeting every single demand. It's about being acutely aware of what our own needs are and what the needs of those around us are, and being able to deliver those in a way that fits with our business direction. So I'm not going to spend too much time. There's a couple of slides now that I'm not going to spend too much time going through, because we'll turn into a full leadership development session at this rate. But a few points here, practical tips on the slide. It's one on the following one, and we can share these slides with you, of course. Some of the practical steps we can take in terms of leadership impact that will make a difference for people. So I'll leave that second slide up for you just to have a brief look through, and I'm happy to take any questions about any of these points if you'd like to know more about how to do that. But what I would like to finish on is my view that investing in our own development has a really strong business case, because if our people are choosing whether they want to be led by us, whether they want to work with us, or they want to go and try out their luck somewhere else, as much as we can do to create the environment for them to fulfill their potential, to be intrinsically motivated, then that's going to save time and money that's created by turnover. So this stuff, it takes time, and this is one of the biggest challenges, because all of you professionally are probably, I'm guessing, pushed to the limits day in, day out, and so finding the time to be a leader and spend time understanding what you can do to support people needs to have a financial return. And I think if we start to look at the cost of turnover and start to create this business case for some investment. And leadership is getting harder and harder. We're working in a more and more of a complex world. So some of these points on here is kind of the really key areas of development for being a successful leader: building self-awareness, building agility, and building our own resilience. So at that point, I will stop sharing and happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much there, Kay. I thought that was absolutely fascinating. I just want to check with one of our panel, Carolyn, because I know, Carolyn, you have to head off. I don't know if you've got a kind of 5 minutes or so, because I just think that what Kay was saying right at the end there was that the first thing to do before you start thinking about other people is to think about investing in yourself, to give yourself the skills. And I think that perfectly kind of segues into what you do what you do, Carolyn. So I don't know if you want to say a few words about the programs that you run.
Yes, brilliant, thank you. And that was really very insightful, and also agrees with all of the research that we do. As an organisation, we do a lot of research and a lot of insight work. We also have the ability, because of the Chartered Institute, to lobby and talk to government about things, about bills, about the importance of qualifications, etc. Picked up on a couple of things you said there about carrot and stick doesn't work. Absolutely doesn't. No, I mean, it used to be that I'm a manager and you'll do it because I say so. Well, that world is long gone, and certainly through pandemic was long gone. Autonomy is a really key thing, and it's something that we as an organisation, who are in fact a charitable organisation, interestingly, so actually, do you know what, we could possibly wander down the road and do what we do somewhere else, but we believe fundamentally in what we're doing, which is improving managers and leaders to improve worldwide industry. So we believe in what we do. As a company, CMI have given us massive amounts of autonomy. Our CEO had a Friday question and answer all through pandemic. Any question you wanted to ask was never a silly question. She sat there for as long as it took to answer those questions. We were included in the decision making about what we did. An inclusive working environment, again, we have that flexibility, so we are giving wellbeing days. As an organisation, all of our members now have access to a Couth platform, which is about management and wellbeing. So someone becomes a CMI member, they have the access to that, not just for themselves, but for managers to be able to identify if someone in their team is struggling. Because whilst we would love to think that everyone will say, I'm not okay, actually the reality is they don't. And if you're a manager and you may not have even met some of your team, as has happened to some people, how are you supposed to know if these guys are struggling or not? So Kooth will support a manager to manage his team in that way, but it will also support an individual. I think one of the other key things you said as well was about learning new skills and CPD. One of the things we recognised pretty early on was that people don't necessarily always have time to have a 2-year qualification in management and leadership. What we've developed is a program called bite-sized programs, and these bite-sized programs cover anything from managing change to EDI to resolving conflict to managing hybrid teams. And those are very short, sharp training courses that actually we've got a number of people who offer these to their guys for reward and recognition. So they look at where the skill gap is. They give them those courses for reward and recognition. They automatically will become a foundation chartered manager when they've completed those. So not only do they walk away with some skills, knowledge and behaviour they didn't have, they've got letters after their name, and who doesn't like having letters after their name? So as we also said, we can't just keep throwing money at this because there isn't the money. And actually, we all know that really that doesn't happen and doesn't work, because all that will happen is that an organisation down the road will find out how much you're on. If they really want you, they'll just pay you more. But actually, the bigger picture about wanting to make a difference for me is the thing. And that's why fundamentally there is 2 different kind of styles here. Someone who is a manager and someone who is a leader. And someone who is a leader is the person who will make their people want to work, who will take a story and take their teams along with them. But equally, there are people who need to be managers and get people to a place that they need to be, but do it in the right way. And that is no longer about things other, in our opinion, and that's why we have our own professional standards that have nothing to do with what we call the harder skills. They're all around soft skills. They're all around how to motivate, develop and make people feel worthy, wanted and wish to stay. And it's not just about, and you talked about Glassdoor research as well. People do that now. If they're going to go for a job, they go onto Glassdoor and they see what the people who work for an organisation say about it, because it's that important to them. It's that choosing your boss thing that you mentioned, Kay. They want to be in a position where if they're going to make that leap, then they want to know it's the right leap. I've spent a lot of my life working in recruitment. And one of my biggest kind of pushbacks to people when they talked about a recruitment fee was, how much is it going to cost you for the person that you lose in terms of productivity, what their team won't be doing, what productivity they won't be doing. And it is, you know, when you think about actually the financial cost, and potentially the wrong kind of leader or manager in an organisation costs not just money, but an awful lot more than that. So I'm aware I've blurred. And I'm going to have to love and leave you guys, but thank you so much for having me. And Kay, it was really, really interesting listening to the things that you talked about, because they so resonate with what we do.
Thank you so much, Carolyn, for your time, and thank you. That's brilliant. And yeah, we'll catch up later. But yeah, thank you very much.
Have a good time, guys. Take care. Bye bye.
Okay, so David and Kay. We've got there's a kind of a series of questions that came through in the chat box that I know David, you kind of have kind of chipped in an answer, but for the purposes of those people that are watching on record or missed that because they were swept up with Kay's presentation, there was a comment about kind of Generation X, Generation Y, Generation Z, or I think Millennials, Gen Y, aren't they? I think, but and yeah, does this kind of approach and the things that Kay was talking about, does this really apply to, and you know, the one that I'm going to go for is does it apply to Gen Z? I think we've heard a lot about Gen Z and the ways in which, you know, Gen Z seem to be different from previous generations. And you know, I know one of the things that's been kind of leveled at Generation Z is that they're not going to stick around long anywhere. So, you know, does this kind of work for them? So, Kay, how does the work that you've done there and those kind of ideas, how does it apply for that kind of new generation that's been kind of born out of technology?
It's really interesting, and as I saw that question in the chat box, actually I was just trying to have a quick look back to the actual report, the research report that I mentioned with the Institute of Leadership and Management, but I can't bring it up quickly enough. So but what I do know is that they definitely identified difference in values based on age, and so that would apply to these different generational groups, and on gender as well. Also differences between different types of role, different professions that people go into. So perhaps, and again, I haven't got the detail in front of me, but for people who work in accountancy and finance profession, perhaps some of their values will be different. But specifically on this point of Gen Z, I've read some research that indicates that actually what's starting to come through is that people are more value-led in terms of social values, so that they would expect naturally more inclusivity, for example, because they are experiencing that quite strongly in education. They are tapped into that very strongly through social media and Black Lives Matter campaign, and that kind of highlights that sort of thing. But I think one of the potential issues is that that generation are not involved in the conversation. You know, they're at that entry level, they have grown and experienced the world in a completely different way to all of the rest of us. And there's, I suppose my concern with them is a risk of quite a big disconnect between all that we've experienced and our frame of reference around the world and the frame of reference that that particular generational group bring. And so my fear is that whilst we experience and observe a lot of behaviour within an employment context, we don't sufficiently well enough understand the values that are driving that group, and perhaps they're not sufficiently mature yet to be able to articulate those as well. So I kind of approach this with kind of a high degree of curiosity and an open mind, really. I certainly agree with some of the comments, you know, that I observe differences in my own personal experience. But in terms of what we do with that, to understand and keep hold of those people, I think there's a lot more we need to do to have really good quality conversations and create an environment where they feel safe enough to say what's important to them and what they think.
Okay, thanks, Kate. I know that it's something I was involved in a panel talk a few months ago about Gen Z and the challenges that we face when recruiting Gen Z now, and I was kind of one of the lone voices that said that this isn't something that's particularly new, because but my background is because I teach people. I've been, you know, since I was training to be an accountant 20 years, I've been in the classroom ever since, pretty much. I had 3 years or so working, doing an accountancy job in kind of in industry, and then I was teaching non-stop for the last 16 years. And so when I very first started teaching, when I qualified, there were, you know, people in the classroom were there with magazines and newspapers before class, and they'd be doing a crossword or reading a magazine. And then gradually over time, you know, technology started to invade and attitudes changed and the clothes people wore changed and the way they addressed you. But I just saw it as an incremental change. Year after year, things were changing. But then when I was speaking to people on this panel, they said that, you know, people weren't like this when I was training. And then I realized that, you know, you train, you qualify, and then for a period of time, you are honing your skills and getting really, really good at your job. And then at a later point, you then become a manager. And it's only then when you're managing people that may be 10, 15 years separated from when you qualified, you recognize there are those big differences. You know, it's a bit like people that, you know, are parents and saying, oh, kids are very different from when I was a kid. Well, you were a kid 30 years ago and you went through the last 15 years before you had children, not being involved with anything children-like at all. So it's quite understandable how suddenly, you know, there are lots of things that have changed. But it's, you know, only when we become managers that many of us actually encounter those differences. And I know, David, you made some really good comments about where you've seen kind of Gen Z in the things that you deliver.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, there's a great report from ACCA about Gen Z, and you know, one of the things that they were identifying is, and it comes back to Kate's point about, you know, what's the motivation? Why are they doing this qualification? And whereas perhaps, in the past, accountancy was chosen, it was safe, it was stable, it was, professional, all of those sorts of things. I think there's a much wider recognition now that accountancy and finance is actually a really good business skill. And therefore, people who are coming into the profession, who are studying, almost before they've started, have this ambition. Actually, I want to be an entrepreneur. I want to run my own business. I want to do this. In order to do that effectively, I need this qualification. And I think that's a really different cultural shift. I think back to my day when, I aspired to be an accountant all my working life, and that was what I did. So I think that change in expectation and perhaps the freedom and the flexibility that comes with that is something that I think is quite exciting, and I think it's something that we can, as a profession, we can really tap into and make use of.
Yeah, I agree with when you talk about kind of tapping into the talent and the skills that are there. And one of the things that I kind of think of is that when I first started training to be an accountant, the office that I worked in had just bought in a load of computers that were all running Windows 95. And that was a massive moment because suddenly we could use spreadsheets, and we used to have a room full of people on typewriters that then we got rid of, and they were all replaced by these machines. And I distinctly remember going into one of the partners of the firm, and it was a guy called Ray, and he was asking us to total up the stock count for a golf club. So the value of all of the equipment that they got in their shop. And I said, oh, I'll just go and put it on a spreadsheet, and then I'll send it across. I don't think we even emailed it. I think we just put it on a file server and then someone could access it. And he said, oh, no, I want you to use the adding machine because I don't trust spreadsheets. And that was me kind of going back then. And I must have been an alien for another planet. But if we fast forward to now, when you've got, one of your people joining that's saying that is trying to contact a client, and they're saying, oh, I'll just DM them on Instagram. So, well, is your client on Instagram? Is that the service that they use? Is that the best way to catch them? And sometimes it is. And so being able to understand, different communication technologies, different technologies that are out there, there's things that this generation have been brought up using. It's been thrust upon the rest of us. But it's probably no different to me kind of working into that firm and just saying, spreadsheets are brilliant, aren't they? And half the partners going, I don't trust spreadsheets, they don't add up properly. So I completely agree in terms of using those different skills. And something that Kay, you mentioned that really rang true to me was you talked about having a purpose and working towards that purpose. And I don't think he's quite in here at the moment. He was in earlier. Gareth John was here earlier, and he recruited me into my first teaching role. And I took a quite substantial pay cut to move from working as accounting in industry to teach, because I believed it was the thing that I was born to do and I wanted to do it. And since then, I haven't looked back. I haven't had a year in my life when I haven't been teaching for a substantial portion of it since I made that choice, because it's what I love doing, and it's what I get immense job satisfaction out of. How can we help people to understand what their purpose is, and how can we actually meet that need? Is there a way we could do it? I can understand in a science museum, you're furthering knowledge, and it's that kind of environment. But if I'm a firm of accountants, how can I do that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And actually, thinking back to the example I shared about kind of moving from banking into an organisation with a social purpose. That actually, going back to that banking example, I had a purpose which was about developing people, and that was my kind of aligned with my professional role. I can do that in any organisation. It doesn't need to, it doesn't matter what the purpose of that organisation is, but I still need to believe in it. Now, if I was to think about the people, the difference in the culture between head office and branch network, then it might be quite different, because the people who are out there working in the branch network chose to work in that particular high street branch because they wanted to help people buy houses, or to help people save their money for a rainy day, or to help people have the assurance of knowing that if the worst happened, their children would be provided for. Now that's a different purpose. When you think about purpose of banks, you know, we usually have a stereotype of they're there to make money and that's the end of it. But that isn't the underlying fundamental purpose of a bank. And so what can really help, and one of the things that we use often in our workshops when we're helping people understand this is that simply to ask that question of why, and just keep asking why until you get to that point that goes beyond paying the bills for an individual or paying the shareholders from a business perspective, and keep going beyond that. But yes, why? So it's repeating that question, why, is a really practical way that we can use when we're having our conversations with our teams to really understand their purpose. It's also about asking a simple questions like, what's important to you? Because when we think about values, that's all values are. Values are the things that are really important to us. And again, sometimes people really struggle when career coaching, people find it difficult to determine what it is that's most important. And so looking back can be really helpful to encourage people to think back at different points in their career and their education, if they're younger, to the times they felt most fulfilled, times they felt they were doing their best and they really enjoyed doing that. That can help people to pinpoint what's important. The other way to do it is to look forward and ask people, what do you want your legacy to be? I mean, what do you all want your legacy to be? You know, in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years time, and you look back on your career, what mark do you want to have left in your profession, in your organization, in the people who you've managed and led? And that's a different way of thinking about our values and our purpose. And it can really help. Sometimes we find ourselves feeling as though we're a little in conflict. We don't feel like we're quite fit in our role right now, and we can't work out why it is. And that might be because our values and our purpose might be shifting. They might have changed. They don't stay the same throughout our lives.
And David, would you add anything there about how accountants can help to kind of inspire people with the values that they have?
Absolutely. Well, I must admit, you know, the image that was given to me. So I was a 20-something. I'd left university and I'd studied law. I loved the discipline of law. I knew I didn't want to be a lawyer. Had no idea what I was going to do. And I went to the careers library and they said, have you thought about accountancy? And I walked out. I thought, I can't think of anything more soul destroying and boring than being an accountant. And it was only over time that I actually then started to work in business and started finding things that were really interesting in terms of actually, gosh, you know, I really enjoyed analysing that branch or that part of the business to see what was driving it and all of that. The phrase that was given to me actually was very similar to what Kay was talking about. It sounds a bit morbid, but it's a very positive, I found it a very positive experience, which is to write your own obituary. And it's the obituary, not the one that you think you're going to get, the one that you would like to get. And what that did for me was it freed up, you know, I wasn't constrained by what I'd done so far. It was very much a what would I really like? And of course, it's very different because nobody's going to write an obituary saying, you know, I hope that I was, you know, this person was financially secure for all of their life and had a good income or whatever. And it was out of that, I mean, certainly for me, I felt very strongly about teaching. But as an accountant, you sort of think, well, I don't know quite how I'm going to use that. And there was a conflict there. And I think Kay made a very valid point, which actually we can live out whatever our vocation, whatever our desires are, in countless different ways. And so for me, you know, teaching has taken a very specific form, which is teaching accountancy. My wife is a teacher. She teaches reception class primary. You know, and over the years, we've both seen those roles emerge. So my observation would be, as employers, I think the most valuable thing we can give our staff is that encouragement and that support for them, particularly if they're starting out in their career, to have that freedom to explore, that freedom to experiment, and that freedom to reflect.
Excellent, thank you, David. And Kate, one of the things that you talked about there, with banking and the different areas of banking, the reasons people get into it. I spoke to a bank manager of one of our local branches down here in Essex, and he just moved from one bank to another bank, and his reasoning for moving from one bank to the other was that the other bank I was treated a bit like a number, and if the computer said no, I couldn't do it. And what I love doing is working with businesses, and I love, you know, helping them to borrow money to grow their businesses and become more successful. And that's why I get out of bed in the morning. I don't get out of bed in the morning to type some stuff into the computer and tell people no most of the time. And I kind of, you know, really rang true with exactly as I heard. And I think as accountants, if we can start telling the story of, you know, the clients are the people that we are helping, and what are we helping them to do with the work that we do, suddenly the work seems more valuable to me going into the business than I help prepare accounts for a range of small and medium-sized businesses. So I think you're framing what you're doing and recognizing what kind of, you know, what your purpose actually is, okay, is really, really useful. Now,
absolutely agree, David. And on that, it's not just there, applying that into accountancy. As a client of an accountant, that I really feel and experience a difference from my current accountant, who I can tell is really passionate about helping me grow my business and advising me, compared to a previous accountant who was much more transactional. And so in terms of business development and business retention, it makes sense as well. You know, it pays as a commercial gain from having that.
One thing I do want to come to, because you mentioned it, I think a couple of times, you talked about the idea about giving people autonomy, because that's something that people really value. And you mentioned about kind of being flexible to allow people to work kind of when they want, how they want, things like that. Now, something that I've heard from employers that I deal with is that one of the reasons that they've lost staff members is because they've been offered entirely remote working elsewhere. And that particular employer wanted them in the office for a period of time. And the reason that they gave for not being willing to offer kind of remote working was that they're a junior member of staff and they need to learn, and they need to see us and how we work and learn from us and have those discussions in the office. So, you know, if we need, you know, our people to be there to learn, how can we give them flexibility? Is it possible to do it?
That's really interesting, because I would start, as you might expect me to, challenge that view in the first place, to say, to understand how much of our own frame of reference we're putting into that situation. We're looking at that from our own, based on our own experience, our own experience of how we've learned and how we've developed in our careers. And therefore, you know, if that's what's worked in the past, then that's what we should continue to do. I would always be encouraging us to say, well, you know, to be asking the questions, what if and why not, rather than the why should we type perspective. But, you know, again, the practicality, it's, and it takes us back to that Gen Z thing. You know, it's the same thing playing out, that whilst for us it might feel more inefficient, or it might feel more clunky to support people in their learning and their development and mentoring in that way, whereas for Gen Z, that is how they do it. That's much more efficient. So I think the pandemic's really demonstrated to us that a lot of what we felt wouldn't work well can work well. And but I'm a kind of, in two positions here, because I can also see and have experienced that from a management point of view. It's much more difficult to manage, to coordinate people. For example, if you've got some in the office and some at home, and then when do you find the best time to have a meeting? Those types of practical things can be challenging. But I really feel as though we should try and ask that question of why not, rather than why should we.
And David, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I've seen this in terms of delivering training, and I love face-to-face. Yeah, if my personal preference being in the same room as people, great. And when I think Kay made the point, you know, we go into lockdown, we're forced into a change. What fascinated me was actually there are some students who benefit from online training. There are some students who wouldn't feel comfortable sitting in class asking a question, who are very comfortable asking a question you know, remotely. And I think sort of extrapolating that into the workplace, you're thinking about teams that I've managed in the past. You know, the challenge, I think, is perhaps less for the individual than it is for the manager. That actually, for an individual to work remotely or to work flexibly, if they've got a good manager, actually that's the most important thing, and everything else comes out of that. And I can, you know, see, I can think of teams that I've been part of where actually we've all worked remotely and it's worked brilliantly, and I can think of teams where we've all worked face to face. It's been an utter disaster. So I think with Kay, I'd agree that the medium, I think, is changing, and the question is how can we ideally get the best out of both.
Okay, cool. The other thing that I kind of wanted to talk about, kind of linked with that remote working, and David, I don't know if you want to kind of like come in first this time, is Kay mentioned that coming out of COVID, we had kind of like surveys from staff where feedback has kind of declined as we've come out of COVID. And I think Kay kind of said that this may be because we're not having the same level of interaction with our bosses that we may have had beforehand. Is it the case that, do you think that we're kind of moving back to a normal, or do you think we're kind of reacting about it and we're actually losing some of the things that we really should be holding on to that we had during that COVID period?
That's a very good question. In one sense, I think the genie's out of the bottle, in that having been forced to work in a certain way, we've now seen that actually it can be made to work. I think in terms of what are particularly, what are staff expecting, I think having experienced that flexibility, it's very difficult to take it away. And Kay was talking about motivational factors. Yeah, and one of the criteria I often use with motivation factors is what happens if you take it away. And often what we think we're giving as a gift, the bonus, the the extra salary or whatever, we think that's something extra, but actually when we take it away, we realize the individual, they haven't gone from motivated to neutral, they've gone from neutral to frustrated. And my observation is that I think having become used to the flexibility of actually being able to work at home sometimes is brilliant and really helpful to me. If I suddenly lose that, actually, it's not a case of saying, oh, I'm now going back to the way I was and I was happy before lockdown. Actually, people are now saying that's now actively demotivating me in a way that it wasn't before. So I think we seem to be seeing more of a move back into the workplace, obviously. I suspect there's going to have to be a bit of balancing. And from what you've described, there's almost a bit of recalibration in the market about with those people who say, actually, what's a priority for me is that flexibility, or what's a priority for me is that face-to-face. And maybe we're going to start to see people re-choosing their managers, their teams, their departments, their companies with that more in mind.
Thanks, David. Kay, what are your thoughts there? Because you kind of mentioned it in your talk.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with what David said, and I think part of this is, this big shift that's being mentioned in people moving from one organisation to another is in part very much driven by finding the working model that works to meet their needs, having experienced a different way of working. But I think it very much comes down to the individual, and just to pull in this point that Kirk's made, his question in the chat as well, that for some people working at home works and for some people it doesn't. and the same goes for office working, and the same goes for hybrid working. All of us individually are in different situations, which also don't stay the same. So what works last year might not work this year and won't work the following year. So it's fluid, and we all need different things. Now, I wonder if what was happening early on during the pandemic was, what was different was that there were a lot more one-to-one conversations between managers and individuals, and this huge kind of situation that really alongside caused many of us to re-evaluate what's really important to us. And never before would we have had that kind of burning platform and the opportunity to discuss that with our manager. And so we've experienced that, and people responded really positively to that in terms of their relationship with their manager. And that's what we're coming through in employee opinion surveys, for example. But now we're kind of going back into the day-to-day, and whether it's the same as before or it's a new normal or whatever it is that we find ourselves in, it's that level or type or depth of conversation isn't happening. And I think that's perhaps the shift we need to see in leadership, is from, often when we think about leadership, we think of a one-to-many relationship, and perhaps the emphasis on the one-to-one relationship and providing the flexibility and compassion as far as we can within that is what might make a difference.
Yeah, thanks for that, Kay. And I love the point that you're referencing in the chat box, because it's something that I was really, really conscious of when we were planning, well over a year now, coming back into class. Whereas we always had discussions about is it safe to come back into class from a health perspective, and should we be getting back into class? Should we go back this month, next month, the month after? When should it happen? But for me, I looked at some of my team, and I've got members of the team that are kind of young apprentices, and they live in a flat, they share with other people, they've got one room which is their own space, they sleep in that room, they eat in their room most of their time, and they work in that room as well. And you know, you could see that the level of happiness that they had was declining over time. You know, they were talking about the kind of issues that they were having, and how they would really like to get back to seeing people properly in a work-based environment again. And I think that there are people that don't perform well at home, and much prefer being in the workplace. And I think you're absolutely right. It's trying to get the blend right, so that the people are actually working in the way that it's most effective for them and healthiest for them as well. Which again, I think you referenced a few times about managers needing to be kind of aware of welfare, and the welfare of their teams being more important now than maybe it was kind of in the past in terms of retaining people. Now,
sorry, Doug. I think we've seen that more generally in life as well over the pandemic as well. And I don't know if one of the emails that I got on this subject was from Gail. I don't want to put you on the spot, Gail, so just jump in if you do want to. But there was a lot of kind of parity with the session in the email that I had was about autonomy and well-being. But one of the things that really kind of got my interest was the daily huddles. It's kind of side of things. And Dave, you'll know this. That I've been kind of talking about this for quite a while. I got a lot of friends who work in IT, and they've got that kind of agile way of working. Oh, hi Gail, again. And this is something that we brought in, where because we have got one of the things we've seen at First Intuition is actually the pandemic made a lot of our officers work together more than we had, because everything was online. We were all on the same platform, whether you're in Chelmsford or Yorkshire. But I think it's that daily or weekly contact that you do miss, and I've seen it with friends, and in the village that I live in, not seeing people for ages because the kids weren't in school, so we weren't bumping into each other on the school run. We weren't kind of going to parties and then going, oh, actually, should we go for a run next week or something? And I think that happens in the workplace as well, and offices can be busy, and so you can be in the office and still feel quite lonely, but because you bump into people, then you get that contact. And that actually, if you put some structure to it, like in that IT kind of idea of daily huddles, quick, what's going on, what have you got challenges on, and so Gail, you mentioned that you brought that in your organisation.
Yeah, it was a concept, because I worked in industry for 11 years in property management. It was a concept that was brought in there, and then when I moved back into practice, I've only been in back 6 months, I brought it with me, and it's been really, really well received, actually. So the way we run our business is we have pods. So we have our client accountant with the bookkeepers underneath, and so each pod has their own huddle board, but then we have a department level huddle board, and as a department we meet twice a week, but as a pod they meet every day. And a key part of the huddle is not just about the work, you know, what you committing to do today, and then the next day you check in and say, okay, did you manage to get that done? If not, why not? What was the blocker? Not you failed. It's okay, what happened? We need to remove a blocker. How can we help you to do that? But in it, we have a well-being check-in. So we have a capacity share. So everyone grades themselves from 1 to 4, deliberately an even number, so they can't pick 3, so that we can do that capacity sharing. But also we have a page that is all the different types of moves, and all the boards are personalised. So someone uses different flavoured beers, someone uses different footballers, dogs, cats, and it gives that opportunity. So people just pick a word. So if you have anything on the extremes, you know, extremely positive, it opens up a really lovely positive conversation in the morning. But if it's a negative, it's a, okay, let's catch up after the huddle, and then we'll always ring them. But on top of that, I also meet with my direct reports on a frequency that suits them. So I started off daily when I first came in, and I've got like 8 direct reports, so it was pretty time heavy. But now they've dropped away to twice a week or once a week, depending on what their need is. But yeah, I think that one-on-one is just so important to get the honest conversations. But yeah, so that was but just one other thing that I wanted to pick out. There's been a lot of talk on here about management being leading people, and another thing that we introduced is the framework, which shows that just because you don't manage people doesn't mean you're any less value to the business. So we put in a framework that has different bandings, so technical, professional, business services and management. And someone with a really good technical skill is the same level. So the levels are vertical. So even if you're managing people, if you're technically brilliant, you're on the same grade effectively. So just given that alternative, not everybody can manage, not everybody wants to manage, and it shouldn't be your success shouldn't be measured by the number of people you manage. Yeah.
Oh, thank you for that. Like I said, and thank you for your response, because it was really detailed, and there's so much kind of on there. But I mean, and just on that kind of like that day-to-day kind of contact, it doesn't have to be in the office as well. My wife works for the council here in Leeds, and she has a lot of team members that are still working remotely and prefers to do it that way. But she goes for a walk with them. You know, she goes out, so she's often kind of driving off to a park and just having a half an hour or an hour and just having a one-to-one catch up. And so it can work. You just need to maybe work a bit harder with it, I guess.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you very much for your input, Gail, and thank you very much for all the responses that you gave. Because Andy forwarded me the email, and he sent a comprehensive list of things, which was really, really useful. I think quite a number of the things that the issues that you talked about, I think Kay and David have kind of between them kind of discussed some of them in some ways. So it's really nice actually to see practically what you've done with what Kay and David are suggesting are kind of things that we should be doing in order to help to keep our teams together and not kind of suffer from any of those retention issues.
I think one other thing, it was something that Carolyn was talking about before she went off around people's well-being. What I found, and actually I was in my old business when the pandemic really hit, is that where you've got individuals with a mental health history, and I myself have a mental health history, I think people focused and worried about those individuals, whereas actually us people with first-hand experience were like, right, this is a high-risk time for me. I need to make sure I'm incredibly self-aware of my own mental health, and we all have our control mechanisms in place. And actually it was the people that had never suffered before that became the biggest risk, because it happened and they didn't know what was going on. So I had people on the teams to me in tears, and I was like, okay, I think there might be some mental health going on here, but they didn't recognize it. So I found that was the biggest risk.
And I think the one thing that I've noticed coming out of or over that pandemic period is the willingness of people who have suffered from mental health issues in the past, the willingness of them to come forward and explain how that felt to them, so that other people can then kind of understand what that kind of feels like, what it looks like. And I was kind of quite staggered by the number of people, kind of both publicly and also within First Intuition, and clients and students that actually came forward with their stories. And it's, you know, by being able to explain what's happened to you, helps other people to realise those kind of things may be happening to them. So no, I think really valuable. So thank you very much, Gail, for coming in at the end. I thought that was absolutely brilliant. We are right up against time, and I know people have got work to do this afternoon because it's coming up to 2 o'clock. So I'd just like to say thank you very much, obviously, to Gail for coming at the end there. I thought your comments were brilliant. Thank you so much to Carolyn, who I know has logged off since, but thanks to David for all of your comments today, and thank you so much, Kay, for sharing your insight with us, and thank you for answering the questions that we have. If you have got any more questions, feel free to email us, and we can pass them on. For Kay and David, is there a way that if people wanted to, they can connect with you? Can they connect on LinkedIn or anything like that?
Yeah, LinkedIn is probably the easiest initially, and then yeah, very happy to make contact there.
Yeah, sure, LinkedIn as well, although you'll probably find me as Kay Thompson on LinkedIn rather than Kay Thompson Barker. I can't remember, I use different names interchangeably just to confuse people.
Excellent, and thank you for everyone for attending today and giving up your lunchtime. It's always wonderful to see as many of you here. Thank you for your comments and your questions in the chat box. And we will see you at the next Lunch and Learn. I believe the next Lunch and Learn is on the 1st of July, and I will be hosting it. We're doing a special on the finance of the food industry. So I've got some experts who work in the food industry that are going to be talking about the finance involved in it, and also some of the challenges that they're currently facing in that particular industry. And there's a few questions that I'd like to ask them about things like cost of living increases, and also what they're doing about the environmental impacts of the food industry, because the food industry, as we know, is one of the highest polluting industries in the world, and kind of what they're doing to make those changes. So hopefully you'll be able to join us on the 1st of July. But until the next Lunch and Learn, hope you all stay safe, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks for hosting, Dave, as well.